Welcome to Build a WebSocket Server with NestJS. This is part 1 where we will build a basic WebSocket server in NestJS. In the following video, I'll show you how to build a basic client to connect to this server and send some messages back and forth so that we can play with it. Now I'm going to dive into the code really quickly, but first let's talk about prerequisite knowledge. You're not going to need to know much, but let's cover our bases. First, you need a decent working understanding of JS and TypeScript. This is a must, and I presume that you already have that if you're interested in NestJS and Socket.io. Number 2, you don't need to be a Nest expert, but I will presume that you know the basics. You could probably follow along even if you don't know NestJS, but you're not going to understand really what you're doing. And finally, you don't need to know anything about Socket.io really, since Nest is going to take care of most of that on our behalf. But you should have some basic understanding of how WebSockets work, at least at a conceptual level. And with that said, let's dive right in. I will be using the Nest CLI. Just to check what version I have. I have 6.2.1. So if you don't have the Nest CLI or you have a previous version, you should do it npm install, there it is, and then do something like that, right? If you have a more recent version than what I'm using, it may work fine, but no promises. So let's kick this off. I'm going to say tutorial. Oops, I might want to put the new keyword there. Yes. I like to use yarn, so I'm going to select that. Okay, looks like we're ready. So I'm going to cd into that directory. I'm going to, let's see, let's open up code. It's going to say we don't have a git ignore. Would you like to add it? Yes, of course. So let's do a little cleanup first. If I look in my source directory, I don't need this spec file. I'm going to delete that. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and delete the controller too. And I'm going to delete the service and just leave the module. So now let's come and take these things out. Save, and we've just got a basic module here. So let's go to the terminal. I'm going to use the Nest CLI once again. This time we're going to do NestG for generate gateway app, just like you see there. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm leaving the modules file open so you can see that the Nest CLI is very good to us and goes ahead and adds in what we need to reference that. So again, I'm not going to be doing testing, so let's just get rid of the spec file and just look at the app gateway. Now we've got a couple of things in here, but before we get into this, let's just look and see that we're getting an error. Cannot find this. That's because we did not install what we needed to install. So let's do that. Yarn add. Well, that's one of them in my history. We want to add the types for Socket.io. We also want to add, let's see, at NestJS. Oop, there it is. So you want to add NestJS WebSockets and at NestJS platform socket.io. Add those. And voila, this is working. So let's get started. So here's our app gateway. We've put the correct, well, it's actually already for us, has put the correct decorator at the top to identify this as a WebSocket gateway. There are some options you can pass here, but I'm not going to mess with that right now. We're just going to leave it at the default settings. The next thing we have is a subscribe message decorator and a method. So it does not really matter what you call this method underneath, as long as it's underneath this and you say what the message is. then it will the server will subscribe to this event called message. I'm going to be a little more explicit, and we're going to call this event message to server, right? And then when we send things to the client, we can say message to client. That way it's much more explicit and you understand what's going on. Let's see what we want to do. Well, just to show you that this is working, let's do something like implements on gateway. Finally. And then let's just click here. We're going to implement this interface. As you might have guessed, the after init will run as soon as the gateway initializes. So just to show you that this thing is booting, let's do something like, let's add a logger. How about that? So we'll say private logger, and we're implementing that from NestJS common equals new logger. We're going to say this is the app gateway logger. So on the init, we want to say this.logger.log initialized. Okay. At this point, let's just save this. And we'll just do a yarn start dev. And let's hit enter. And we can see right here that we're getting that message that the gateway is running. At this point, our WebSocket gateway is running. The NestJS is running. So if a client were to connect and to send a message to server event, then our server would handle it. So the next major step is to create a client in a little bit of HTML and JS to connect to this server and test it. But before we do that, I want to go over this class just a little bit more. And to start with, let's look at the subscribe message. So whenever we want to handle an event on a server, we put this decorator just above whatever function is going to handle it, and we tell it the name of the event that this is going to handle. In this case, it's message to server. And in the method right below, two things are going to be passed. One is the client socket. In fact, let's go ahead and type this. This is going to be socket. And be careful where you import from. Let's make sure it's from socket.io. There we go. And then the payload, which I know in this example, we're just going to be sending text strings. So why don't I just rename this text? And we say it's a string, right? And then, well, let's actually get a little more specific and say WS response of string. Oops. And then what we're going to be returning is a little object that looks like this. It's going to be event is message to client. Actually, not text, data. There we go. And that's typed now, so we can actually check to make sure that we can use TypeScript and actually use that to ensure that our types are correct. However, I mean, we do have a reference to the client, and I want to say that this is basically equivalent to, let's comment this out, and let's just say void. That is basically equivalent to doing this, client.emit message to client text. So that's actually a little bit shorter, but you don't get the type safety you do with returning a WS response of type string. So let's comment this out and let's uncomment this. And if I were to put something like a number here, I should get it. Yep, you see, because this, whatever's in the data, should match what you have right here. Okay, so in this case, it's checking to ensure that's a string, and the string to pass is just the text, right? Another point to make is that this is only going to return to the client that sent the event. So if this is, say, like a chat app or something, not everyone's going to receive this message. It's just going to be the client that sent it. If we were to want to send this to everyone, we would do something like, again, we do a void here, and then we're going to use another decorator at the top. Let's do @WebSocket server. Yep, that looks about right. We're going to call it WSS, and that will be of type server. Again, make sure you're importing from Socket.io. So if we want to send in the response to everyone, we would do something like this .wss.emit message to client text. Right? We're not really going to do that right now, but I wanted to show you that in case you wanted to do something like that. We will actually handle that in the near future. But for right now, we don't need it, so let's just take that out. And let's go back to our typed version. String, and it always does that, doesn't it? Okay, we're good to go. One more thing before we move on. Let's look at a couple of other things we have here. So let's say on gateway connection. So this will run whenever a client connects to the server. And then we'll do an on gateway disconnect. Okay. So let's implement on gateway connection, and let's implement on gateway disconnect. Let's move them down here where I like them. Of course, it's fussing about wrong types of quotes. And imagine up here it wants to reformat that somehow. Oh, it doesn't want to auto fix it for me. It's all happy now. So let's get rid of some of these any types. It's going to be server. This is going to be a socket, and this will be a socket as well. And then instead of throwing an error, how about let's just do a log. And in both of these cases, all we're going to do is log down here that a client was connected, and we're going to pass the client ID. This is just a unique string. It's different for every socket that's connected. Also, if a socket disconnects and reconnects, it's going to have a different socket ID, and we'll see that in the log once we start playing with the front end. Let's save this. So upon initialization, the after init will run. Upon any client connection, this will run. Upon any client disconnection, this will run, just another logger. And once we're connected and the client sends some message, like some basic text on the event message to server, our server will handle it. And in this case, all it's going to do is take that text that was sent by the client, turn around and emit an event called message to client, and pass that right back. So you've just built a Nest WebSocket server. Great, but I'm willing to bet you're feeling a bit unfulfilled at this point. In order to test this server out, we're going to need to build a simple client that will connect to this server and then send messages back and forth. Let's take care of that in the next video.